All right, so it's 1:02. Let's begin. Everyone, it is great to see you with us this afternoon. Thank you so much for taking time to join us. My name is Matt Soldner. I'm here at the U.S. Department of Education, and I'm joined by a great colleague, Jessica Cardashon, and we are so glad you are taking out some time of your afternoon to learn with us together in our first of 3 webinars about the department's inaugural learning agenda. Probably no surprise, we're going to begin with just a few housekeeping issues. So as a reminder, we are going to record this session today. Not everyone is able to join us. We do intend to share the recording. So if you do not want to be on camera or want to be on mic, now is a good time to turn those off for you. We're using auto-generated captions. You can turn those on by going to the top of your screen, clicking on the More button, and choose captioning. As a reminder, during the presentation, if you can, please keep your cameras and microphones off to avoid distracting others or being caught on camera if you don't want to. We will reopen the chat and cameras and microphones during our QA. And we will save time at the end of the session, I promise, for questions. We did receive a few questions in advance of today, so we're going to begin with those that we got from our early registrants. But if you have questions as we're going through the content today, we'll make time at the end to address those as we can. You'll be able to put those questions in the chat box, or you'll be able to raise your hand to be recognized. As I mentioned in the intro, I am joined by a wonderful friend and colleague. Evidence building and evidence use here at the department, as I will say several times today, is a team sport. Jessica Cardashon, who is our Deputy Assistant Secretary in our Office of Planning, Evaluation, and Policy Development, will join us in just a few slides. We will try not to throw too many acronyms at you. If you aren't familiar with what OPEPD is, as we affectionately call it, our friends in OPEPD and Jessica help coordinate across all the offices in the department to ensure that through our budget, through our legislation and regulation and other kind of programmatic development, that we are doing all that we can to have work that's in line with the Secretary's priorities and guidance. We'll give her a minute to introduce herself in a few slides, but it really is wonderful to be able to share the stage with her today. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Matt Soldner. I'm here in the department's Institute of Education Sciences, where I have the pleasure of serving as the commissioner for our National Center for Education Evaluation. I think many of you who are familiar with IES know we are the department's statistics, research, and evaluation arm. I'm wearing a somewhat different hat today than I usually do. I'm taking off my IES commissioner hat and I'm putting on my evaluation officer hat. As we'll talk about in just a minute, the work of the Evidence Act, which we're talking about today, is a whole of department activity. And so it's not something that's done just at IES. It's an ed-wide, and I'm lucky to be able to participate in that work. So just so you know where we're headed today, we're going to have 4 sections. I'm going to begin by talking about what a learning agenda is and how it's meant to support evidence-based policymaking. And then I'm going to stop talking with you all and turn it over to Jessica, who then is going to spend time talking about the department's goals and objectives related to supporting a diverse and talented educator workforce. Once she's finished that part of the presentation, I'll come back in and we'll talk about the evidence building activities that we have on tap to support those goals and objectives, and enlist your aid if you are willing participants in assisting us in that work. And then, of course, we'll end by talking about some Q&A and answering any questions that you may have that come up during the course of our time together. As a reminder, this is just the first of 3. So if you did not sign up for 3 webinars, you can go back into your registration and add the next 2 if you would like. The second webinar, which we'll hold on January 11, I'll be joined by Ruth Ryder in our Office of Elementary and Secondary Education to talk about building evidence to meet K-12 students' social, emotional, and academic needs. And then on February 8th, I'll be joined by our Deputy Undersecretary, Jordan Matsudaira, talking about post-secondary education and increasing post-secondary value for learners through evidence building. So if you like today's session and want to have a couple more hours with us, we'd really encourage you to sign up. We would love to have you. So with that kind of intro set forth, let's dig into the real content of why we're here today and why I've asked you to join us and talk about the department's inaugural learning agenda. Some of you may already be familiar with this, but if not, I want to give just a bit of background. By now, you may have heard that in 2018, Congress passed the Foundation for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act. We just call it the Evidence Act for short. And the goal of the Evidence Act really is to ensure that federal agencies are using high quality evidence in the process of meeting their mission. And in particular, the Evidence Act asks us to focus on achieving the specific goals and objectives that we have in our agency's strategic plan. I would not expect all of you are devotees of the strategic plan. You probably have not had occasion to read it, but if you haven't, now is a really good time. You can go to performance.gov and see not only education strategic plan, but the strategic plan of all the large agencies government-wide. So if you haven't had occasion to check out our plan or that of agencies that might also bear upon your interests, I would really encourage you to go to performance.gov and take a look. Based upon the kind of expectations of the Evidence Act, we should be, whenever possible, using high quality evidence, as I said, to enact policymaking. But when it doesn't exist, the Evidence Act says, well, you have an obligation to build it. And that's really what we're talking about today. What kind of evidence do we need to be building to help meet our policy goals and the strategic goals and objectives that have been set forth for department? And the priority questions, the ones that really rise to the top, the things that we need to focus on the most to really meet the mission, make up our learning agenda. So when I use the word evidence, and I use the word evidence building, and that it should be used in policymaking, what am I talking about? So we have a fairly shorthand definition inside the department, which you see on your screen. And we use this definition once a quarter when we talk about evidence building with all new employees as they join the department. We say, evidence is high quality information used to inform decision-making, created when the appropriate analytic methods are applied to trustworthy data. And we could dig into that definition, but each of those words really is intentionally chosen. It gets to the nature of evidence being action-oriented. It gets to the notion that high-quality evidence is based upon trustworthy data, and that there are specific methods which lead to more kind of credible forms of evidence. Above that definition, our colleagues in the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, have offered a framework that I think is pretty helpful in describing the broad landscape of evidence and what kind of constitutes evidence in the view of the Evidence Act. And so if you've been on any presentation related to the Evidence Act, you may have seen this graphic. Coming from IES, when you hear me talk about evidence, your mind might immediately go to a rigorous randomized control trial or a quasi-experiment. And it's really important to know that in the Evidence Act, evidence is substantially broader than that. And so this graphic depicts 4 quadrants of evidence, each somewhat different, each serving a somewhat different purpose, but all of which can generate high quality evidence that can be put in the hands of policymakers like Jessica to inform the decisions she is going to make on behalf of the department. So I'll quickly take you through the 4 types of evidence just so that you're kind of clear on what OMB has in mind when they use the term. The first is foundational fact finding, and it really gets to the question of what are conditions on the ground. And I think probably many of you, if you're on this call, know already of the great work done, for example, by our National Center for Education Statistics through its countless surveys of colleges, universities, schools, states, districts, trying to paint the descriptive portrait of what's happening in education. So that could be data sets you're familiar with, like CCD in the post-secondary space. It could be iPads and many others. And importantly, foundational fact finding isn't just the purview of the NCES. It's any effort being done department-wide to map the landscape related to the condition of education. So OCR civil rights data collection is another example of really important data that's foundational fact finding. In the upper right-hand quadrant, another type of evidence, somewhat more internal to the department, is all the efforts we undertake related to performance measurement and improvement. And so that really asks, are progress being made towards our agency goals? our partners, such like as our grantees, making progress on their work. And so those are all the performance metrics, the annual performance reports, the GIPRA measures, other things we report to OMB and Congress that help us keep tabs on those kind of leading indicators of potential success. In the lower left, you will see policy analysis. Policy analysis in its most formal sense might be regulatory impact analysis as part of our rulemaking. But there are other kinds of policy analysis that take place to help to inform our work in policymaking. And then finally, last, certainly not least, and certainly not better or more important than any other kind, is program evaluation. That's often the kind of work that you do associate with IES, or particularly my center here at the National Center for Education Evaluation. The rigorous kind of RCTs and quasi-experiments that help us understand where programs and practices and policies really are truly making a causal impact on the outcomes we care the most about for students. Importantly, again, none of these are privileged over any other, and so each are a valid and important source of evidence for policymaking. Second, I'd like to make it clear that not just is the definition of evidence broad, the definition of who an evidence builder can be is quite broad. In fact, the Evidence Act makes it clear that the government isn't a solo actor in evidence building. We're not the only ones who can answer the questions we're about to talk about. It envisions really a robust ecosystem of partners inside that space. And as we get to the end of our time together today, I'm going to invite you in to be a member of that ecosystem if you would like to be. We cannot do all the work that is before us without your help. This is already happening in some ways, big or small, but this really is our first sort of broad public outreach to really invite you in to say, hey, please join us in intentional fashion in evidence building moving forward. And then finally, a quick side note. We're really focusing today on our learning agenda. That is the questions we want to answer to inform policymaking. What the learning agenda doesn't tell you is how we're going to execute against those questions. That appears in a separate document, the annual evaluation plan. And we're not going to talk about the annual evaluation plan today, but I would tell you it's available at evaluation.gov. And I would strongly encourage you to check that out as a companion document to the department's learning agenda. Now, on to the main event. As I mentioned, the learning agenda is all done in service of the agency's strategic plan. We published our inaugural learning agenda alongside the strategic plan in July 2022. And again, you can find the learning agenda on evaluation.gov. We have 6 focus areas aligned to the administration's priorities that form our 2022 to 2026 learning agenda. And I'll show you all 6 on this slide. In no particular order, you'll see first addressing the impact of COVID-19. Second, promoting equity in students' access to resources, opportunities, and inclusive environments. Third, supporting a diverse and talented educator workforce and professional growth to strengthen student learning. The fourth is meeting students' social, emotional, and academic needs. The fifth is increasing the value of post-secondary education. And the sixth is kind of the offset or offshoot of that, effectively managing federal student aid programs. And inside of each of those focus areas, between 3 and 6, 7 questions are nested. So these are sort of the headlines, and then double click would be the specific priority learning questions inside each area we hope to address. So like many agencies, we shared those broad categories out via an RFI in the Federal Register this past year, asking folks to comment on the specific questions they felt were most important, ways they might approach building evidence in those spaces. We combined that information along with information we were getting from colleagues inside the department as well as elsewhere in government to generate really this first set of priority learning questions that you're about to see. They're quite broad. As you will see later on as we move to the Q&A, if you believe there is important work to be done that you don't see reflected in the totality of those learning questions, we'd love to talk more after today about that. So today, we're going to focus on topics 1, 2, and 3. So really, we have thought about the issue and the impact of COVID-19 and equity as really weaving through each of the subsequent focus areas inside the learning agenda. So we're going to focus today on 3, but I'm going to pull out for you today or highlight for you today kind of the intersection of this teacher workforce issue along with COVID-19 and inequity issues. And we'll do the same in our subsequent webinars as well. Oh, yes, a quick caveat I was reminded of by a colleague. I can't forget this. We are really excited about the energy and enthusiasm in the field about this topic. As I discussed, or as Jessica discusses, or as you in your Q&A, we might bring up the names of specific projects, commercial products, or organizations. As you probably heard department folks say, just because we mentioned one of these doesn't imply our endorsement by the U.S. government. With that out of the way, let's really dig in. So one last slide from me, and then my good friend Jessica Cardashon is on deck. We wanted to put up this slide, which we call the policy and evidence cycle. It is nothing formal or fancy. I'm sure you've seen something like this before. But what it gets to are the integration points or the intersection points of policy and evidence use. And so you'll see we really envision it moving through these 5 phases. So there's a policy opportunity, which Jessica will probably talk about in her slides. And in that moment, when we have that policy opportunity, we want to be using the best available evidence to help shape that, to inform the next phase, which is the actual policy development. That policy is developed, then it is implemented, and then again, evidence comes back in an evidence building phase, right? Which then we kind of reassess, and there may be another policy opportunity. So this is probably very familiar to those of you who are working in the space. You've seen cycles like this before, but we just wanted to make it clear that there is this constant interplay between policy development, evidence use, policy implementation, evidence building, so on and so forth, with hopefully the goal of continuously improving our work together on behalf of the nation's students. So with all of that as background, I am really pleased to turn it over to my friend Jessica Cardashon. It's great to have someone from the department who's able to speak on this issue and our policy goals and priorities. With that, Jessica, I will drive the slides for you. So you just tell me when you're ready for me to move on to the next slide. I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Matt. A real pleasure to be here. And, as Matt said, it is critically important for us that evidence grounds all of our policy development. While at the beginning of the administration, we had a very strong and comprehensive agenda, it is very much grounded in the research. And as policy opportunities come up, work hand in hand with Matt and his team to make sure that the best research and evidence is informing our policy design and development, and are always looking for those opportunities. And so I'll focus around our overarching goals and objectives around supporting a diverse and talented educator workforce in their professional growth. But I just want to quickly go back to a slide that we don't actually go back to it, but I'll reference it, a previous slide that Matt had showed, around the other priorities around equity, whole child, addressing the impact of COVID, student aid, and completion, that we see supporting a strong and diverse educator workforce as critical to advancing those other priorities, and that advancing those other priorities supports a strong workforce. So we think, again, looking at the research, having a qualified, effective, experienced educator is so critically important for helping, for teaching and learning, that we really see that supporting a diverse educator workforce is critical to our equity agenda, and making sure that every child and youth has access to a qualified educator. We want them to be prepared to meet the social, emotional, mental health, and academic needs of their students, to address the impact of COVID. I know there's a lot of attention on different strategies around how we can support academic recovery. The best strategy is a well-supported and qualified educator who can support strong teaching and learning. A lot of our higher ed agenda around college affordability, completion, addressing student debt load, we see as very much a part of our efforts to support our nation's teachers and other educators in making sure that they can stay in the profession, aren't saddled by debt, and can access high quality preparation programs. So wanted just to take a minute or two to put our priority around educators within the context of our other priorities. So we know that supporting a strong and diverse educator workforce begins with the pipeline. We want to make sure that our teachers of color, other teachers have access to comprehensive teacher preparation programs with strong clinical experience, rigorous coursework, opportunities to reflect on practice, opportunities to participate in learning communities. We know that it can look different for whether you are an undergrad student or a paraprofessional coming into the profession, or a STEM career changer, or a student doing a dual enrollment early college or CTE educator pathway in high school. And so for us, regardless of the pathway, we think that evidence really points to those key components of a quality pathway into the profession. We also want to support kind of those efforts of everything from recruitment preparation to also placement, and making sure that great teachers stay in the profession so that they have the supports that they and their students need to succeed. That, like many other professions, they have opportunities for professional growth, and to participate in distributive leadership, to share their expertise with other teachers. And we want to make sure that our most underserved students have access to qualified educators. And so those are the overarching goals that we have within this work. Next slide, please. There is, like many of our biggest challenges, there is no one policy that will get us there. And so I know this is pretty tiny font, but we see that all of these strategies are critical to making sure that all students have access to diverse and qualified educators. Some of these are easier levers at the federal level. Some are more specific at the state level. And so we'll talk about that when we go through this. So I'll spend a little bit of time on each of these 6 different areas. Next slide, please. So one of the big pieces of it is providing teachers with a livable and competitive wage. Again, this is something that is not within the federal control. It's really at the state and local level. And so we really want to, I know the secretary has been out there, the deputy secretary, the first lady, as much as possible, encouraging not just states to look at what their starting salary is and raise it, but looking at, is this a competitive wage compared to other professions in the state that require a similar degree and credential, and is it livable? We've seen in a number of states that some educators that are the sole or primary breadwinner in their family, the family of 4, qualify for other forms of federal government assistance. And so we want to make sure that teachers can do this and not be stressed about paying their bills. And what we can do on our end is encourage states to do that, highlight the number of states that are doing that: Rhode Island, New Jersey, Alaska, who've really done that, and other states like New Mexico that are working to increase teacher pay. On our end, we're going to try and make sure that our teachers aren't saddled with student debt to help put more money in their pockets. And our higher ed team is working very hard on public service loan forgiveness, strengthening the Teach Grant program. And so again, we see very much our higher ed agenda being about how we can better financially support our teachers. And we want them to afford comprehensive pathways into the profession. We know that teachers that go through these comprehensive pathways are 2 to 3 times more likely to stay in the profession compared to other professionals who go through less comprehensive pathways. So our goal is not just to get teachers in the classroom, but keep them there and set them up for success. Next slide, please. And so we have put a lot of money, as Matt mentioned, it is an air, land, and sea approach within OPPD. So we want to elevate good practices and strategies through our guidance and technical assistance, but we want to also put federal dollars behind it. We were so pleased to be the first administration to work hand in hand with Congress to get first-time funding for the Augustus Hawkins program. $8 million this year. We were hoping for an FY23 omnibus that builds on this investment, but that supports high-quality teacher preparation programs at MSIs, tribal colleges and universities, and historically Black colleges and universities. And so we're really excited. We'll be announcing the first set of grantees by the end of this month, and couldn't be more thrilled to do that. And again, we will continue to use every opportunity through the bully pulpit to call on states to provide teachers with a competitive and livable wage and close gaps between what teachers might be paid in a better resourced district compared to a district with higher poverty rates. Next slide, please. Our other piece, so again, part of that agenda is increasing those number of programs at tribal colleges, historically Black colleges, universities, and MSIs. And then once teachers are in the profession, we really want to make sure that they have opportunities to grow professionally. And I'll get into it in a minute. There are a number of different ways that we see that happening, but we want to maximize the impact of effective educators. So whether they are serving as mentors or family liaisons or more directly involved with curriculum development or school climate, that we're really looking at the many different strengths our teachers bring and supporting professional learning communities where teachers can learn from each other. We often, when I was teaching, the first person I always asked was the teacher next door who'd been teaching 30 years. What do I do? And I think it is important. 6 years in, she actually asked me what to do, which was really nice on something. But teachers learn best, I think, from each other, and we want to make sure that we are encouraging that and supporting it. Our teachers are taking a lot of hits the last number of years and want to make sure not only our respect is shown through what we pay them, but how we invest in their professional growth and development. Next slide, please. And so, again, I've been trying to prioritize through our discretionary grant programs, opportunities for teacher residencies and grow your own programs. And what we think are critically important about this is that many of the high quality ones are based on strong partnerships between institutes of higher education and districts, so that kind of what the skills and knowledge and dispositions that teachers need to have, that information can go back to IHEs, that they can learn from what their graduates are experiencing, but that also that districts have those partnerships and that those teacher candidates have time, ideally in the district or school that they're going to work with before they graduate. Again, really want to encourage the use of federal dollars around supporting opportunities for experienced or effective educators to work as instructional coaches and mentors. We are hopeful in an FY23 omnibus, we will get a significant increase in the EIR program, which we are going to target around teacher retention, specifically focused on improving working conditions and providing opportunities for teacher leadership. Next slide, please. And then finally, the last two pieces is, one of the data that we're looking at around teacher shortages. We know that districts and schools experience these shortages differently. In some communities, it might be a shortage of special educators or STEM or CTE teachers. And so we really want to not only strengthen the pipeline, but for our current teachers who might have a general education or K-6 license, financially supporting them to get those additional in-demand certifications. Many teachers, regardless of whether you're teaching bilingual education, you have multilingual learners in your classroom. Whether you're a special education teacher or not, you will likely have students in your classroom with an IEP. We know that schools, particularly secondary schools, may not be able to provide high quality CTE or STEM or advanced placement opportunities for the students because the teachers don't have the requisite skills to teach those courses. So really want to support teachers in earning those additional credentials. Others as well are on national board certification, and that we're investing in their development. And then again, prior to COVID, when we've seen teachers kind of call for an increase in their salary, they also call for additional supports for their students. They want to be effective and successful in their profession, and they know what their students need. And very much our agenda around increasing the number of full service community schools, mental health professionals, tutors, and other supports, after school programs. This is all meant to make sure that teachers have the supports and programs and opportunities for their students to help them succeed. We can't do this at federal level, but we are encouraging districts to think about how much time teachers have to learn and collaborate and work from each other. Many other high-performing nations, teachers, and some of those teachers spend more time in professional development and communities of practice than actual instruction, and really rethinking about how we're using time for our teachers and their students. Next slide, please. And I think this is it. So these are some of the things that we are trying to advance in our budget request, in our discretionary grant programs, in our guidance around how American Rescue Plan dollars can be used, significant funds there available to do this great work. And so really have been continually trying to elevate research-based practices and the kinds of investments in those practices at every opportunity. And so really appreciate being able to share some of our work with you and the wonderful partners here at the department and outside the department that are helping to advance this work. So Matt, I will turn it back over to you.
Hey, thank you, friends. So everyone, if you have occasion to get out a pen, jot down some notes or questions you might want to ask Jessica at the end of our time together. We'll have some time, I hope, to get to those at the end of our session. So several times it warmed my heart to hear Jessica talk about the importance of evidence in policy making and policy development. We're about to go into a list of questions that we have that are related to the policy goals and objectives of the department, the strategic goals and objectives outlined in our strategic plan and elsewhere. As you heard Jessica talk, you may have thought to yourself, wow, I actually know lots of great research on that topic. I have it. If you know of great research on the issues that you just heard are important to our colleagues in OPPD, I would really encourage you to share it. We don't know what we don't know. You probably have seen this email address through the registration process for this webinar series, evidence@ed.gov. If you have information, high quality evidence you think we should be aware of as we go through the policy development process, or as we think about building evidence about the impacts of policy, please send it. We would appreciate hearing from you. All right, so you heard Jessica talk about 3 objectives related to the educator workforce. And as I mentioned, the learning agenda is meant to tie back to those specific objectives. And so as part of the 3rd pillar of the department's learning agenda, we have 3 or maybe 2.5 priority learning questions. You can see 1 priority learning question mapped to each of the issues that Jessica raised. Now we're going to go ahead and take some time and look at each of those, the kinds of evidence we think might be helpful to advance our policymaking effort, things we're doing already related to that, that hopefully will inspire you to join us in the evidence building process. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of those, I want to go back to an issue, though, that Jessica raised. There are interplays and points of intersection between various issues in the learning agenda and this issue of the teacher workforce. As I mentioned today, issues around COVID-19 and issues of equity are deeply interconnected with many of the questions we have related to the teacher workforce. So although we're focused on 3 priority learning questions inside this area, there are several others that we think if you look at the whole of the learning agenda, you should be aware of, and I draw your attention to. And so the first 3 questions you see there all related to COVID-19 and the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on educators and the students they serve. And then the 4th question in our 2nd focus area related to equitable access to resource and opportunity. So now we'll dig into the 3 questions most directly related to the teacher workforce. As we do, I'd like you to be thinking in the back of your mind or listening for these issues. 1, if I raise something as a question and you feel it's settled because you're aware of just the perfect research that answers it, please let us know about it. You may be onto things we're not aware of. 2, having just heard what Jessica outlined as the department's strategic objectives in this space, are key questions missing that should be included in the learning agenda? We'd love to hear about that. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, think to yourself, is this a question I'd like to collaborate on answering? Is this something that also excites and energizes me? And I would like to find a way to collaborate with the department on building evidence on this issue. So first, we have a question 3.1 on how the education workforce can come to reflect the diversity of the nation's learners. Jessica spoke to this in her overview of our policy goals. Certainly, probably most of us on the call are aware of evidence to suggest that a more racially or ethnically diverse workforce can benefit students, particularly students of color, and lots of hypotheses as to why that might be the case. And so there are some specific pieces of evidence we're seeking. There may be others you think would be relevant for us to ask, but we're asking questions and looking for evidence like reliable, accurate, and granular data about the composition of our educator workforce that would allow better understanding of workforce trends and issues and the student-educator alignment in individual buildings. Of course, work is already underway in this space, but you may think of other things we could be doing. Just yesterday, IES's National Center for Education Statistics, NCES, released the latest data from NTPS, our National Teacher and Principal Survey. it provides a really rich description of the nation's education workforce, but it's via a sample survey, right? So it's not necessarily as granular as we might like. Other information does get more granular. The department's EdFacts collection, which you might be aware of, gathers school-level data on several professional characteristics of educators, but not about the educators' characteristics themselves. So there's probably some evidence building to be done around this reliable, accurate, and granular data about our educators and their match to the students they're serving that we're trying to kind of shore up and gaps we're trying to fill. Secondly, on this point, we're interested in learning more about strategies that inspire potential educators to make the decision to pursue education as a career. So work inside my own center, NCE is working on teacher residency programs, as you heard Jessica mention. She also mentioned Grow Your Own and other programs that can be on-ramps to the profession for folks. And I would be remiss if I didn't point out good work going on in our Office of Elementary and Secondary Education and their SEED grant program supporting effective educator development, really challenging grantees to use and build rigorous evidence related to this issue. So work is happening in the department inside this space, but if you see an opportunity for your organization to engage around this issue of developing a teacher workforce that's more reflective of our nation's learners, we would love to have you join us in the effort. Our second priority learning question in this space is what is effective in preparing, recruiting, and retaining a well-qualified educator workforce that's equitably distributed within and across schools and districts. And so this kind of foundational fact-finding evidence, this condition of education evidence, suggests that students, particularly students who have been historically at a disadvantage by education systems, have that unequal access to effective, fully certified and in-field educators. And given the strong association between access to effective teachers and student outcomes, this is an issue we'd like to remedy. So we're looking for similar types of evidence as we were in the first question. So first, we need better descriptive information that's reliable, accurate, and really importantly, granular about the characteristics of the educator workforce associated with the effectiveness of teachers that would allow us to have better understandings of the inequities in student access to well-qualified educators. As I mentioned in the prior slide, our EdFacts data collection begins to get to some of that, but doesn't necessarily answer the entire question. I'd point out that some states have done work in this space, building dashboards that provide information about the distribution of educators and their characteristics in schools served by Title I. But we don't yet have that complete picture for all the districts and all the schools in the nation at the federal level. And so there's a gap there for us to fill. And then again, on the strategy side, what are strategies that support districts, particularly those that are rural and or high poverty, in recruiting and retaining well-qualified educators? Lots of work happening department-wide in this space, but more to be done. Our regional educational laboratory programs here at IES currently have 8 research practice partnerships nationwide, partnering with SEA colleagues trying to address this issue, each developing and testing strategies that we hope we can lift up and share nationwide. And NCER, our National Center for Education Research, is doing the same, but in the Grow Your Own space, funding researchers who are studying GYO programs and pathways. So again, looking to shore up our descriptive data on this issue and then really identify the policies, programs, and practices that are most likely to help us recruit and retain well-qualified educators in these kind of districts. And then finally, preparing a workforce that is particularly well able to provide underserved students the supports they need, whether they're socially, emotional supports, academic supports, or others needed to be successful in work and lives. Jessica mentioned the whole child. Learners bring their whole selves to school every single day, and education systems need to be ready to support the whole student. And so the kind of evidence we're looking for here in this priority learning question are strategies that prepare pre-service or continually develop in-service educators in subject-specific pedagogies, in supporting specific social and emotional skills, in supporting student wellness, including their mental health. So I should say, work in this category includes not just the ability to support educator to do the things that move the needles for students in this domain, but it also includes the more basic and early applied research needed to figure out what works. That's what will then kind of generalize and lift up, right, to form the basis of that high quality teacher PD that we know is needed to ensure students are served in this manner. So work in all of those dimensions is already underway. So we have our seed grantees, an OESE that I mentioned in the prior slide, who are implementing and evaluating a wide range of programs in this area, including focusing on topics in civics, in STEM, the integration of SEL and core academic subjects, and educator well-being. A project I'm particularly partial and a way we're already building evidence in this space is through our What Works Clearinghouse practice guides and a partnership with our regional educational labs. Each of our RELs are taking practice guides and turning them into comprehensive professional development toolkits for communities of practice or CLPs that can really assist in-service educators translate those evidence-based recommendations inside our practice guides into practice in their classrooms every day. And then finally, I should note that NCER and its sister center here at IES, the National Center for Special Education Research, NCSER, has awarded more than 120 grants in this last fiscal year alone, including topics related to early literacy and numeracy, supporting ELs, improving reading comprehension, engaging students post-COVID, and promoting emotional wellness. So a lot of work is happening inside the department on this and the other two priority learning questions that we have inside this area. But I can assure you that we will not be able on our own to do all the work that's needed to help Jessica and her colleagues in our policymaking offices ensure that all those decisions have all the evidence she and her peers would like to have. And so this is my ask of each of you who are on this call, and actually an answer to the first question that we received from among our pre-registrants. Whenever I do this talk, I say that evidence building is a team sport, and it is very true. And if you or the group you represent share a passion for any of the issues you have heard us talk about today, we would love to collaborate. As I mentioned, these are all complex issues and we cannot do this work on our own. So if you're interested in collaboration, what might that look like? So it might be reaching out to us via the email address on the bottom of the screen, or by reaching out to me or Jessica directly saying, hey, we're doing great work on Grow Your Own and would love to share the evidence we have with you so you can make better policy. That would be wonderful. You might say, hey, I have the capacity to do high quality research and the energy and the enthusiasm to do it, but I don't have the resources. Can you help us think about ways we could leverage ed resources to make evidence building possible? We'd love to have that conversation. And then finally, if you simply want to reach out and say, here are our interests, how might they align with the departments, and see if there's some way to have a strategic partnership built around a shared area of enthusiasm, we love to do that as well. So please, feel free to use that address, evidence@ed.gov, to reach out to us about how partnership might begin after today. So on to questions. We had about 4 questions we received prior to today's webinar that we want to make sure all of you have a chance to hear the answers to. We also want to make space in the waiting moments of our time together to be sure that you have a chance to ask questions that we haven't yet answered. So I'm going to work through the answers to these questions first. When those are done, we'll open up the lines and give you a chance to raise your questions in our last few minutes. First, a good question from the audience related to the word evidence. Someone asks, how does this evidence relate to the ESSA tiers of evidence? It's not necessarily a simple question to answer, but I'll do my best, and hopefully this is informative to the folks who want to know this. The two acts, ESSA and the Evidence Act, are kind of unrelated in an operational sense, right? They do not affect one another, but as I mentioned on the slide, they clearly have the same motivation. They want actors, whether they are educators or policymakers, to be using the highest quality evidence available to them. And so they are both compelling folks who are making important decisions about the lives of our students to really do so on the basis of high quality evidence. You know, ESSA, the Every Student Succeed Act, really was a great advance in our understanding of evidence in the department, in that it codified a tiered evidence framework that relates to primarily causal studies of policies, programs, and practices. And the highest evidence tier in the ESSA framework, tier 1, strong evidence, is randomized control trials. The second tier, moderate evidence, are quasi-experiments. The third evidence tier, correlational studies, and so on. It's important to note that the ESSA and ESSA tiers of evidence relate really to that causal impact work. The evidence thought of by the Evidence Act is much broader than that. So there's really much more than just causal studies. Remember, the causal studies were only one little box, right, in that evidence diagram I showed earlier. So the Evidence Act thinks of evidence as being not just quantitative, but also qualitative, not just causal, but also descriptive. And so I'd say these acts have similar goals, but they are really quite different in most respects. Question 3 we received, and we've received a few questions on this, different versions of this. Why doesn't the learning agenda include X topic, a topic I care about? Well, it really boils down to prioritization. So the Evidence Act really does ask agencies to narrow the focus of their evidence building. First, really seek to answer those questions that are most important to meeting mission, but even within that, really prioritize to the set of questions that we can most feasibly or realistically answer. And really that's mostly to do with the fact that our evidence building resources, whether they are human or financial, really are finite. If we tried to answer every question we had, that every office inside the department or every one of our community members sought to answer, we simply would be spreading ourselves too thin. But I do want to say, because topic X does not appear in the learning agenda, does not mean there is not someone inside the department who, like you, really wants information and evidence on that topic. If you have an interest or an enthusiasm around a topic that you do not see in the learning agenda and feel like it's something we really should be attending to, I would love to hear that feedback. And so please reach out to us at evidence@ed.gov. More likely than not, you'd have a champion inside the department. And a final question before we turn it over to folks on the line. The learning agenda is only part of the Evidence Act. How do I learn about what else Ed is doing to implement the law? That question, the asker is correct. The Evidence Act has 3 titles, and today I have selfishly only focused on Title I, which relates to federal evidence building activities. There are 2 other titles as part of the Evidence Act. Title II of the Evidence Act, the Open Data Government Act, focuses on all things data. So data governance, data maturity, importantly, the accessibility of federal data. Title II creates a person responsible for all of that data work as our chief data officer. The department's chief data officer is Greg Fortelny, also in OPEPD like Jessica. He and his team have a great website on ed.gov. If you go to ed.gov and search for Chief Data Officer, you can begin to learn more about how the department is working to meet the requirements of Title II of the Evidence Act. And if you would like to have presentations on that act, I am sure if you reach out to Greg, he would be more than glad to help do those for you. The third and final title inside the Evidence Act, Title III, deals with the confidentiality of statistical data and creates another role, that of the statistical official. Many of you may know Dr. Peggy Carr, our Commissioner for our National Center for Education Statistics. She serves as the agency's statistical official and is responsible for doing all the activities under Title III. All right, with that, those are the prepared questions that we had received in advance. We're going to go ahead and turn the recording off so that you all can begin to think about the questions you might have that come up for you during the course of the day. Go ahead. I'm going to turn the chat back on here in 1 second. All right, so the chat is on. If you have questions that you would like either me or Jessica to answer, please go ahead and drop it in the chat. If you are very brave, you can raise your hand and we will call on folks in the order received.